Hello. I'm glad you're here to listen. Before I begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from. So please tell me in the comments. My story is about how a home, built with a lifetime of love, can become a battleground, and how the people you trust the most can become strangers. It's a story I have to tell, because I know I'm not the first person it's happened to, and I won't be the last. It all started on a Tuesday in October, the kind of autumn day in Maple Creek, North Carolina, where the air smells of wood smoke and damp leaves, and the sunlight slants through the windows in golden bars. My house has always been my sanctuary, especially since my husband, Arthur, passed away 3 years ago. Every corner holds a piece of him. The worn spot on the leather armchair where his head rested, the scent of his old books that still lingers in the study, and the steady, comforting chime of the grandfather clock he bought me for our 20th anniversary. Its deep, resonant tick-tock was the heartbeat of our home, a sound that always made me feel safe. That afternoon, the house was filled with the rich, savory aroma of the pot roast I'd been slow cooking for hours. Arthur's favorite recipe. It was the first Tuesday of the month, which meant my daughter, Jess, and her husband, Mark, were coming for dinner. I had spent the day preparing, not because they demanded it, but because the ritual brought me comfort. I polished the silver, used my best china, and arranged a bouquet of late-season hydrangeas from my garden as the centerpiece. I wanted everything to be perfect, a small act of love to bridge the strange distance that had been growing between us lately. Their car, a sleek, silver sedan that always looked out of place in my gravel driveway, pulled up at precisely 6 o'clock. Mark was a man who prided himself on punctuality. I watched from the window as he got out, his posture sharp and impatient in his tailored blazer. Jess emerged more slowly from the passenger side, pulling her cardigan tight around herself even though the evening was mild. She didn't look toward the house. Instead, her eyes were fixed on the ground, as if searching for something she'd lost. When I opened the door, Mark's smile was instant and bright, but it never quite reached his eyes. "Eleanor, smells incredible in here. You shouldn't have gone to all this trouble." He leaned in for a hug that was more of a brief, firm pat on the back. "It's no trouble at all, Mark. I enjoy it," I said, turning to my daughter. "Hi, sweetheart." Jess met my eyes for a fraction of a second before her gaze darted to the grandfather clock behind me. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was a murmur. She gave me a quick, almost reluctant hug, her body tense in my arms. She used to melt into my embraces. Now, it felt like holding a stranger. Dinner was a masterclass in subtext. As I served the roast, Mark looked around the dining room, a slight frown on his face. "This house has such great bones," he said, the words sounding like a compliment but feeling like an assessment. "You know, we were just talking about how much work these older homes are. The upkeep must be a real burden for you, all alone." I placed a slice of meat on his plate. "I manage just fine. I find the work keeps me busy." Of course, he said quickly. "But you've got to be careful. That front porch step is getting a little wobbly. You know, it would be terrible if you had a fall." His eyes flickered toward Jess. A silent command. Jess dutifully picked up her cue, poking at her carrots. "He's right, Mom. We worry about you here by yourself. The stairs are so steep." "I've been climbing these stairs for 40 years, Jess. I think I know my way," I replied, my voice gentle but with an edge I couldn't hide. My heart ached. This wasn't concern, it was a script. And my daughter, my bright, once independent Jess, was a reluctant actor. I watched her hands, how she nervously shredded her napkin in her lap, her knuckles white. She hadn't said more than 10 words since she arrived. After dinner, while I was clearing the plates, Mark didn't offer to help. Instead, he began to wander through the downstairs rooms, his hands clasped behind his back like a general surveying his territory. He ran a finger along the mantelpiece, examining the invisible dust on his fingertip with a sigh. He peered at the window frames. He paused in the doorway of Arthur's study. "So many memories in here," he said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "You really should think about clearing some of this out, Eleanor. It can't be healthy to live in the past like this." The remark was a physical blow. That room was my connection to Arthur, a place I could go and feel his presence. To Mark, it was just clutter. I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, a stack of plates heavy in my hands. I looked at Jess, hoping for a sign of protest, a defense of her father's memory. She just stared into her empty teacup, her expression unreadable. She was a million miles away. Their departure was as tense as their arrival. On the porch, under the dim yellow light, Mark gestured at the wobbly step he'd mentioned. "Seriously, Eleanor, let me call a guy to fix this for you. We can't have you getting hurt. I have a handyman." "Mark, thank you," I said, keeping my tone even. He just shook his head with that look of feigned, paternalistic concern. "You just say the word. We're here to help you make the sensible choices." The phrase hung in the air long after their car's red tail lights disappeared down the street. Sensible choices. I stood on the porch for a long time, the cool night air raising goosebumps on my arms. The wobbly step felt solid enough under my feet. It wasn't the step that was the problem. It was the slow, methodical erosion of my own foundation. Back inside, the silence of the house was different. The grandfather clock's steady ticking no longer sounded like a heartbeat. It sounded like a countdown. I walked into the living room and looked at the wedding photograph on the wall, Arthur and me, young and beaming. Then I looked at the more recent one, from Jess and Mark's wedding. I was standing next to Jess, but even then, I could see the space between us, a gap that Mark was already starting to fill. A cold dread, heavy and formless, settled deep in my chest. This wasn't just a visit. It was a reconnaissance mission. And I had the sinking feeling that they were planning an invasion. The week that followed was quiet, but the silence in the house had changed. It was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with anticipation, the way the air grows still and thick before a storm. I found myself listening for the sound of Mark's car, starting at every creak of the floorboards. I tried to call Jess twice, but both times my call went to voicemail. "Hi. You've reached Jess. Leave a message." The voice on the recording was bright and cheerful, a ghost of the daughter I knew. I didn't leave a message. What could I say? "Are you and your husband planning to steal my home?" I sought refuge in my garden, my hands buried in the cool, dark earth. Tending to my roses was a task that made sense. You prune what's dead, you nurture what's alive, and you protect it from blight. On a Saturday afternoon, as I was gently tying a climbing rose back to its trellis, the crunch of gravel in the driveway made my heart seize. It was them, unannounced. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the front of the house, my legs feeling strangely heavy. Mark was already out of the car, holding a sleek, dark blue folder with an embossed silver logo. He looked like he was walking into a business meeting, not visiting his mother-in-law. Jess lingered by the car door, her face pale. She was wearing a loose-fitting dress, and for a fleeting moment, I thought she looked different, softer around the middle. But the thought was chased away by the cold purpose in their arrival. "Eleanor," Mark said, his smile as crisp and artificial as a plastic flower. "Sorry to drop in like this, but we had some time this afternoon and wanted to follow up on our conversation." He didn't wait for an invitation. Brushing past me into the foyer, I could smell his cologne, a sharp, metallic scent that felt alien in my home of lavender soap and old wood. Jess followed him, her eyes fixed on the intricate pattern of the Persian rug, her hands clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. "Let's sit in the living room," Mark suggested, already striding in and settling into Arthur's armchair as if it were his throne. I felt a flash of hot anger but swallowed it down. Perching on the edge of the sofa, Jess sat stiffly beside me, a foot of empty space between us. Mark placed the folder on the coffee table with a soft, definitive thud. The silver logo gleamed under the lamplight. Willow Creek Estates, a new season of living. We did some research, he began, flipping the folder open. And we found the perfect long-term care solution for you. Willow Creek is state-of-the-art. It's more of a resort than a retirement community. He slid a brochure across the table. On the cover, a group of silver-haired seniors laughed as they played shuffleboard. Their smiles were wide and empty. I looked at the glossy pages he fanned out. There were pictures of a sterile-looking dining hall, a brightly lit activities room, and a bedroom no bigger than my walk-in closet, decorated in bland shades of beige. Every image was professionally staged, every surface gleaming and soulless. It was a catalog for the end of a life, not the beginning of a new season. They have a 24-hour nursing staff, chef-prepared meals, and scheduled social outings. Mark droned on, his voice a smooth, practiced sales pitch. All your needs taken care of. No more worrying about wobbly steps or steep stairs. No more being alone. The phrase being alone was meant to sound like a threat, a weakness he was offering to solve. But I had never felt more alone than I did right then, sitting next to my silent daughter while her husband tried to sell me a cage. My gaze drifted from the impersonal photos to Jess. "What do you think of this, Jessica?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. She flinched at the use of her full name. Her eyes finally met mine. And for a second, I saw a flicker of the girl she used to be, frightened, trapped. It looks nice, Mom," she stammered, before her husband's gaze fell on her and she looked away again. "It seems very safe." Safe. The word was a betrayal. My home, the one she grew up in, where I nursed her through chickenpox and held her after her first heartbreak, was no longer safe enough. I folded my hands in my lap to still their trembling. "I appreciate you both thinking of me," I said, the formal words tasting like ash in my mouth. "But my answer is no. This is my home. I am not leaving it." Mark's smile tightened. He closed the folder slowly, the click of the magnetic clasp echoing in the tense silence. "Eleanor, we're not asking you to see this as a punishment. We're asking you to be reasonable. You're 71. Last week you told Jess you couldn't find your car keys for an hour. Last month, you stumbled on the porch. These are little things, I know, but they add up. We can't be here every minute to make sure you're okay." He was taking tiny, normal moments of my life and twisting them into a diagnosis. The keys had been in my other coat pocket. I hadn't fallen on the step. He was building a case against me, brick by insidious brick. "I am perfectly capable of looking after myself, Mark," I said, my voice colder now. The politeness in his face finally cracked, revealing the raw, ugly impatience beneath. "Are you? Or are you just being stubborn? Stubborn enough to risk your health and safety? Because if you won't make the sensible choice for yourself, we may have to explore other options." "What other options?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone that made my skin crawl. "There are legal avenues, Eleanor. Options for concerned family members to ensure their loved ones are properly cared for, especially when their judgment might be impaired. A judge could be persuaded that you're no longer competent to manage your own affairs. We don't want it to come to that, but we will do what's necessary to protect you." There it was, the threat, no longer veiled. He would paint me as a confused, senile old woman. He would use the courts to strip me of my home, my dignity, my very identity. And my daughter just sat there, a silent statue of complicity, as her husband threatened to destroy me. The grandfather clock in the hall began to chime, its deep, melodic bells marking 4 o'clock. 4 measured, solemn notes, a funeral dirge. I rose from the sofa, my body feeling both brittle and filled with a strange, cold strength. "The conversation is over," I said, my voice steady. betraying none of the chaos inside me. I want you both to leave my house. Now. Mark stood, a look of surprise and anger flashing across his face. He wasn't used to being defied. He opened his mouth to say something else, but I held up a hand. Leave. He snatched the folder from the coffee table. But in his haste, one of the brochures for Willow Creek Estates slipped out and landed face up on the rug. The smiling, vacant faces of the elderly actors stared up at me. Mark shot a furious look at Jess, who scrambled to her feet, her face ashen. Without another word, they walked out the door. I stood by the window and watched them go, not moving until the silver car was gone. The brochure lay on the floor like a piece of poison. I didn't pick it up. I sank into my own armchair, the one that smelled faintly of my life, of Arthur, of home. The shock was a tidal wave, washing over me, leaving a cold, profound grief in its wake. This wasn't just about a house anymore. My daughter had watched her husband threaten to have me declared insane, and she hadn't said a single word. The battle lines weren't just drawn, they had been carved into my heart. After the front door clicked shut, a profound and hollow silence descended upon the house. It was an absolute stillness that felt heavier than any noise. For a long time, I didn't move from the armchair. I just sat there, listening to the grandfather clock in the hall, measuring out the seconds of my new, terrifying reality. Each tick was a hammer blow, driving the truth deeper. My daughter had made her choice, and she had not chosen me. The brochure for Willow Creek Estates still lay on the floor, a glossy rectangle of poison. I finally bent down, my joints protesting, and picked it up between my thumb and forefinger as if it were contaminated. Without looking at it again, I walked it to the kitchen and dropped it into the trash can, burying it beneath coffee grounds and vegetable peels. Out of sight, but not out of mind. Sleep was an impossibility. The night stretched before me, a vast, dark ocean of time. I made a cup of chamomile tea, my hands moving through the familiar motions on autopilot, but I left it on the counter to grow cold. I wandered through the rooms of my home, each one a gallery of a life that now felt like it belonged to someone else. In the living room, my fingers traced the faint ring on the end table where Arthur used to set his evening glass of scotch. In the dining room, I saw the ghost of a tiny Jess, sitting on a stack of phone books to reach the table, her face smeared with spaghetti sauce. Every memory was a fresh wound. Had I been a bad mother? Had I given her too much? Not enough? The questions circled like vultures. I stopped in front of the wall of family photographs, my eyes scanning the smiling faces frozen in time. There was Arthur, his arm wrapped around me on a beach in the Outer Banks, his eyes crinkling with a love so steady it had been the bedrock of my world. And there was Jess, a gap-toothed 7-year-old on her first bicycle, her pigtails flying. I saw her at her high school graduation, her face alight with promise. When did that light go out? When did she allow Mark to dim it? I picked up the photo from their wedding day, my thumb stroking the glass over my daughter's face. Oh, Arthur. I whispered into the oppressive quiet, my voice raspy. What do I do now? He wants to erase me. And she's letting him. How do I fight our own child? The man in the photograph offered no answers, only his kind, unwavering smile. The grief I'd held at bay for 3 years came rushing back, mingling with this new, sharper pain of betrayal. I felt utterly, completely alone. Seeking some tangible piece of comfort, I found myself drawn to Arthur's study. It was the one room I had kept exactly as he'd left it. The air still held the faint, pleasant scent of old paper, leather, and the pipe tobacco he'd enjoyed on the porch. His reading glasses were still on the desk next to a stack of history books. It was a time capsule of the man I loved, a sanctuary. I ran my hand along the spines of his leather-bound classics, searching for solace in the order and intelligence of his world. I thought that maybe, if I looked at pictures of Jess when she was young and uncomplicated, I could remember the daughter I was fighting for. not the hollowed-out stranger who had sat beside me on the sofa. The old photo albums were on the bottom shelf of the built-in bookcase, heavy and laden with memories. I knelt, the joints in my knees creaking in protest, and pulled out the thickest one, its faux leather cover worn at the corners. As the album slid free, my fingers brushed against something hard and smooth behind it. Puzzled, I reached into the dark recess of the bookshelf. My hand closed around the cool, polished wood of a box. I pulled it out into the dim light of the desk lamp. It was a beautiful mahogany box, about the size of a shoebox, with no dust on it, which meant Arthur must have handled it often. On the lid was an intricate carving of a mighty oak tree, its roots digging deep into the earth, its branches reaching for the sky. It was his favorite tree, a symbol of what he always called enduring strength. I had never seen it before in my life. A small, ornate brass lock was set into the front. A flicker of something curiosity, maybe, or purpose cut through the fog of my despair. Where would a man as meticulous as Arthur hide a key? It wouldn't be anywhere obvious. I thought of his habits, the little rituals that had structured his days. He wasn't a man for grand gestures, but for quiet, deliberate actions. My eyes scanned the shelves, landing on a worn, unassuming hardcover book, Meditations, by Marcus Aurelius. It had been his guide, his comfort. He kept it on his nightstand for years, and I'd moved it in here after he was gone. My heart began to beat a little faster. I took the book from the shelf, its familiar weight a comfort in my hands. I fanned through the pages first, nothing. Then, with a trembling finger, I pried open the stiff back cover. There, nestled in a shallow space Arthur must have carefully carved himself, was a small, flat brass key. It was warm from being held in my hand. I carried it back to the mahogany box, my breath catching in my throat. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft, satisfying click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I lifted the lid. The scent of aged paper and ink rose to meet me. This was no box of sentimental keepsakes. It was an archive. Inside, everything was organized with Arthur's trademark precision. There were stacks of documents held together with binder clips, each neatly labeled in his steady, architectural hand. Property deeds, stock certificates, private holdings. I lifted one of the folders. It was a statement from a financial services firm I'd never heard of, and the numbers on the page made my head spin. They were sums I couldn't even comprehend, followed by a string of zeros that seemed to stretch on forever. I saw a deed for a commercial property downtown, another for a small apartment complex on the north side of town, stock certificates for companies I only knew from the news. It was an entire world, a secret financial empire, hidden behind a photo album in a quiet study. On top of the first stack of papers was a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name was written on the front. Eleanor. My fingers shook so badly I could barely break the seal. I unfolded the pages within. It was a letter, several pages long, all in his hand. My dearest Eleanor, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means you have found this box, and I am no longer there to protect you myself. Forgive me for this secrecy. I know you, my love. You have the most generous heart of anyone I have ever known, and had you been aware of this, you would have given it all away to anyone who asked. I built this not out of a love for money, but out of a love for you. It was my quiet promise to you that you would always be safe, that you would never have to worry. I had to stop and take a breath, my vision blurring with tears. I read on. There is another reason for this box. Eleanor. It is about Jess, and more specifically, about the man she married. I never trusted Mark. I saw a hunger in him that had nothing to do with ambition and everything to do with greed. I had him quietly looked into before the wedding. The man is a gambler, in business and in life, and he leaves a trail of debt behind him. I fear that one day, his desperation will lead him to our door. He will see you not as a mother, but as a resource. He will see our home not as a sanctuary, but as an asset. This box is your shield. Everything in here is in your name alone, structured within a trust that is untouchable by anyone else. Use this power, my love. Use it not to hurt, but to teach. Use it to protect yourself, and to protect the daughter I know is still buried somewhere inside the woman who is afraid of her husband. You are the strongest person I have ever known. Do not let him make you forget that. All my love, forever. Arthur, I let the pages fall into my lap. The tears that came were not tears of grief or despair. They were tears of overwhelming love, of profound, aching gratitude. He had seen it all coming. Even from beyond the grave, my husband was still taking care of me. The oppressive weight that had been crushing me all night lifted. The despair evaporated, replaced by a surge of pure, cold adrenaline. I looked at the documents spread across the desk. No longer just paper and ink, but an arsenal. A shield. A sword. The first pale light of dawn was beginning to filter through the window, chasing the shadows from the corners of the room. The grandfather clock in the hall began to chiming the hour. It was 6 o'clock. A new day. The storm had broken, and I was no longer a victim waiting for the inevitable. I was Eleanor Vance, and I was ready to fight. The sun was fully up, flooding Arthur's study with a light that felt different now, not just illuminating, but clarifying. I sat at his desk for a long time. The mahogany box open before me, its contents a testament to a man who had loved me in ways I was only just beginning to understand. His letter was in my hand, the paper softened by my tears. It was a shield, he'd said. Now, I needed to learn how to use it. Tucked into a side pocket of the box was a simple, elegant business card, Diane Foster, Vanguard Financial Partners. Beneath her name was a phone number and an address downtown. There was no sales pitch, no flashy logo, just information, presented with quiet confidence. Taking a deep, fortifying breath, I picked up the phone. A calm, professional voice answered on the second ring. Vanguard Financial. This is Sarah speaking. Hello. I began, my own voice sounding thin to my ears. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'd like to make an appointment to speak with Ms. Diane Foster. There was a brief pause, not of confusion, but of recognition. Of course, Mrs. Vance, the receptionist said, her tone shifting to one of genuine warmth. Diane has been hoping to hear from you. Would you be able to come in this morning? Say, 10:30. The speed of it, the readiness, sent a small jolt through me. They were waiting for me. Yes, I said, my voice finding a firmer register. 10:30 would be perfect. The Vanguard office wasn't in one of the new, soulless glass towers that were sprouting up all over the city. It was in the historic district, occupying the top floor of a stately brick building with large, arched windows. It felt solid, established, and discreet. It felt like Arthur. The moment I stepped out of the elevator, a woman in her mid-50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a kind smile rose from behind a large oak desk to greet me. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, but her handshake was firm and warm, not corporate and cold. Eleanor, she said, forgoing the formal Mrs. Vance. I'm Diane Foster. It is a genuine pleasure to finally meet you. Arthur spoke of you often. She led me into a corner office that was less of a workplace and more of a library, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, comfortable leather chairs, and a stunning view of the city below. The air smelled of fresh coffee and old books. Please, have a seat. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Tea? Coffee would be lovely. Thank you, I said, sinking into one of the chairs. It felt like an exhale. Diane returned with 2 steaming mugs and sat across from me, a thick, leather-bound portfolio on the table between us. There was no small talk. She seemed to understand that I was there for answers. Arthur was more than a client. Eleanor. He was a mentor and a friend. She began. her gaze direct and empathetic. He entrusted me not just with his assets, but with a mission to ensure you were protected. Always. He called this your fortress of solitude. She smiled. A sad, fond expression. He knew how much you loved Superman. A small, surprised laugh escaped me. I hadn't thought of that in years. It was a detail so personal, so quintessentially Arthur, that it immediately put me at ease. I imagine you have a lot of questions, Diane said, gently tapping the portfolio. The simplest way to explain it is this. Arthur spent 30 years building a diversified and deeply private financial empire. He saw economic downturns and family troubles as storms on the horizon. This, she said, opening the portfolio, was him building you an ark. For the next hour, she walked me through it. The language of finance was foreign to me, but Diane was a patient translator. She spoke of stocks and bonds, of municipal holdings and real estate trusts. She didn't just show me numbers on a page, she told me the story behind them. She explained how Arthur bought land when no one else wanted it, how he invested in small, local businesses he believed in, how he quietly built a foundation of wealth so solid, so unshakable, that it could withstand almost anything. My head was spinning. The woman who clipped coupons, who worried about the cost of a new roof, who worked part-time at the local library for 20 years to help make ends meet. That woman was a stranger to the person described in these pages. Then, Diane's expression grew more serious. She turned to a new section of the portfolio. Eleanor. Arthur was a brilliant strategist, but above all, he was a student of human nature. And there was one person whose nature deeply concerned him. I knew who she meant before she said the name. Mark. Diane nodded grimly. Before the wedding, Arthur commissioned a confidential, very discreet background check. He felt terrible about it, like he was betraying Jess's trust. But he said his first duty was to protect his family, and that included protecting them from their own choices if need be. She slid a thin file across the table. It wasn't an accusation, it was a simple, brutal ledger of facts. A string of failed tech startups, each one funded by high-interest loans co-signed by partners who were left with the debt. A history of maxed-out credit cards. An investment in a cryptocurrency scheme that had evaporated overnight. It was a portrait of a man who didn't build things, but leveraged them until they collapsed. The man Jess thinks is a successful entrepreneur, Diane said softly, is, in reality, drowning in debt. Arthur saw this pattern and knew, sooner or later, that Mark would come to see you and your home as his last, best lifeline. The validation was a cold, hard comfort. I wasn't being paranoid. I wasn't a stubborn old woman. My instincts had been screaming the truth all along. Now, Diane said, turning a final page in the large portfolio. Let's talk about the real estate holdings. Most of it is straightforward land, residential units. But this one is of particular interest. She pointed to a glossy photograph of a beautifully renovated brick warehouse downtown, with large industrial windows and trendy signage. The Phoenix Lofts. It's a mixed-use commercial space on the riverfront. Extremely profitable. The tenants are mostly design firms and tech startups. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a list of the current tenants. And there, halfway down the page, were the words that seemed to leap out in black fire. Innovate Solutions, LLC. Mark's company. I stared at the name, my mind struggling to connect the pieces. His office, I whispered. He works there. He doesn't just work there. Eleanor, Diane said, her voice gentle but clear. He pays rent there, every month. His company, propped up by his last remaining investors, writes a check to a property management firm. That firm then deposits the money directly into a trust that you, and you alone, control. The air left my lungs in a rush. The world tilted on its axis. The man who had condescendingly offered to have my porch step fixed, who had judged the state of my home, who had threatened to have me stripped of my own life, that man was my tenant. He was living on borrowed time in a building that belonged to me. The sheer, staggering irony of it was almost too much to bear. It wasn't just a shield Arthur had left me. It was a sword of stunning, magnificent precision. Diane let the silence sit for a moment, allowing the enormity of it to sink in. Arthur told me something I never forgot, she said, her eyes meeting mine. He said, "Some people think wealth is for buying things. I think wealth is for buying freedom, the freedom to live with dignity. He built this fortress for you, Eleanor, so that no one could ever take your dignity away." I left her office an hour later, the heavy portfolio clutched in my hands like a prayer book. As I stepped out onto the busy downtown street, the city looked different. The tall buildings weren't just glass and steel anymore. They were part of a world I now understood, a world I had a stake in. The fear that had been my constant companion for weeks was gone, burned away by the clean, bright fire of knowledge. I sat in my car for a long time, not starting the engine, just feeling the weight of the portfolio in my lap. I was no longer Eleanor Vance, the quiet widow from Maple Creek. I was the architect of my own protection, and my work was just beginning. For 3 days, the world outside Jess's apartment was a muted, distant hum. Inside, the silence was a deafening roar of guilt. She sat at the sleek, minimalist desk in their spare bedroom, what Mark called her home office, staring at a spreadsheet of marketing data. The numbers swam before her eyes, meaningless. Her head throbbed with a low, persistent ache that had become her constant companion. Her phone, lying face down on the desk, buzzed for the 10th time that morning. "Mark." A text followed immediately. "Jess, we need a unified front. Call me." Another buzz. "Are you getting these?" He was accustomed to immediate replies. Her silence was a form of rebellion so new to their relationship that it felt like screaming. Each buzz made her stomach clench. The vibration, a physical manifestation of his impatience, his control. She had told him she needed to focus on a big project for work. A lie to buy herself a few days of solitude. A flimsy shield against the battle she knew was coming. Their apartment, once a source of pride, now felt like a pristine, sterile cage. All clean lines, gray tones, and polished chrome. It was Mark's taste. A space designed to impress, not to comfort. There were no cluttered bookshelves, no chipped coffee mugs, no sentimental, mismatched furniture. There was no history, not like her mother's house. The thought of her mother's home, of the scent of baking, and the solid tick-tock of the grandfather clock, brought a fresh wave of shame so powerful it made her feel sick. She closed the laptop. The throbbing in her temples intensified. As she pressed her fingers to her forehead, a pop-up appeared on the screen she'd forgotten to close, a bright red email notification from their bank. Subject: "Your loan payment is past due." The words were a key, unlocking a memory she had tried so hard to keep buried. The flashback began, sharp and vivid. It was a year ago. They were in this same apartment. But the air was different. It was electric, with Mark's ambition. He was pacing in front of the television, which displayed a slick PowerPoint presentation. He was buzzing with energy, his eyes bright with the promise of a future he had already sold to himself, and was now selling to her. "It's a game changer, Jess," he'd said, gesturing at a slide with a complicated-looking graph. "A social media aggregator with a proprietary AI algorithm. It's Facebook meets Twitter meets TikTok, but smarter. We're going to be printing money." She, a cautious marketing analyst, had questions. "But Mark, the seed money is gone. The investors you mentioned are waiting for proof of concept," he'd cut in smoothly. His enthusiasm, a tidal wave. "That's why this bridge loan is so crucial. It's the last little push we need to get the beta launched. It's a sure thing." He'd sat beside her on the sofa, taking her hands in his. His were warm and confident. I looked at the loan agreement, she'd said, her voice small. The interest rate it's incredibly high. And they want me to co-sign. His smile had faltered for just a second. He'd squeezed her hands. Of course they do. We're a team. This is for us. Babe. For our future. I can't do it without you. I'm just nervous, she'd admitted. What if the beta doesn't take off? We'd be on the hook for $100,000. The warmth in his expression had cooled slightly. He'd let go of her hands. I don't understand, he'd said, his tone laced with a subtle, wounded disappointment. Is this about the money? Or is it that you don't believe in me? There it was. The emotional blackmail, so perfectly disguised as hurt. He had done this before, twisting her prudence into a personal attack, her caution into a betrayal of their partnership. He made her feel small, foolish, and disloyal for having the very analytical skills he claimed to admire in her career. Of course I believe in you, she'd said quickly, the need to soothe his ego overriding her own instincts. It's not that. It's just a big risk. Everything worth having is a risk, he'd whispered, pulling her close. Don't you trust me to take care of us? She had closed her eyes, leaned into him, and given in. She had signed the papers the next day. The app, of course, had never launched. The proprietary AI algorithm was buggy, and a bigger company had released a similar, better product 3 months later. The debt, however, was very real. Back in the present, Jess pushed herself away from the desk, the memory leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. The pattern was so clear now. He had used that same tone in her mother's living room that wounded, patient tone of a reasonable man dealing with an unreasonable woman. He had isolated her, made her feel like her mother's refusal was a personal slight against them, and she, caught in the web of his manufactured reality, had played her part. She walked out of the office, away from the buzzing phone and the accusing glare of the laptop screen. In the hall closet was a box of things she'd brought from her childhood bedroom when her mom had first sold their old house. She pulled it out, dust puffing into the air. Inside were old yearbooks, concert ticket stubs, and a heavy, worn photo album. She sat on the floor, the cold hardwood a stark contrast to the warmth of the images she flipped through. There she was, a messy-haired kid with a popsicle-stained smile. There was her dad, Arthur, teaching her to ride a bike, his big, steady hand on the back of the seat. And on every page, there was her mother, Mom, reading her a bedtime story. Mom, holding a birthday cake with 16 candles, her face glowing. Mom, handing her the car keys for the first time. Her expression, a perfect mix of pride and terror. She stopped at a photo from when she was about 15. She and her mom were in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, both of them covered in mud and laughing uncontrollably. They had been trying to plant a new rose bush, a big, thorny thing that had fought them every step of the way. And the garden hose had sprung a leak, drenching them both. She remembered the feeling of that day, the warm sun, the smell of the earth, the pure, uncomplicated joy of laughing with her mother until her sides hurt. Her finger traced the laughing face of the woman in the photograph. The woman who had patiently taught her, fiercely protected her, and loved her without condition. The woman she had sat next to while her husband threatened to dismantle her life. A single, hot tear escaped and fell onto the plastic sheet covering the photo, blurring the image of her mother's smile. Her phone buzzed again from the other room. A distant, angry insect. This time, she didn't flinch. She just sat on the floor, surrounded by the ghosts of a better version of herself. The weight of her lay a crushing physical presence. The choice wasn't made yet, but for the first time in a very long time, she could see the bars of her cage. The following Monday morning, I sat in a conference room that felt a world away from my quiet life in Maple Creek. The air was different here. In the hushed, expensive offices of Albright and Associates, It was the air of quiet, formidable power. Across the polished mahogany table sat Diane Foster and Ms. Albright, a woman in her 60s with a razor-sharp mind and a gaze that missed nothing. She was Arthur's estate lawyer, a recommendation from Diane, and she listened to my story without a single flicker of surprise. When I finished, she steepled her fingers, her expression thoughtful. "There are several avenues we can pursue," she said, her voice calm and measured. "A restraining order is the first step. We can also file for damages related to emotional distress. And of course, there is the matter of his fraudulent business practices, which we can refer to the district attorney." "I want to stop him," I said, my own voice surprising me with its steadiness. "But I don't want a war that will drag Jess through a public spectacle. Not yet. Anyway." Diane nodded, understanding. "You want a strategic move, not a frontal assault." "Exactly," I affirmed. "Mark sees my home as an asset he is entitled to. He feels powerful threatening it. I want to show him what happens when a real asset is threatened. I want to hit him where he truly lives. And for a man like Mark, that's his wallet, not his house." A slow, appreciative smile spread across Ms. Albright's face. "The lease on his office at the Phoenix Lofts," she said, already grasping the strategy. "Ironclad. The redevelopment clause is airtight. He would have 30 days to vacate. It would be financially catastrophic for his business. He won't see it coming," I said. "He thinks I'm a confused old woman in a big house. He has no idea I'm the one who holds the key to his entire professional life." By noon, the plan was in motion. Ms. Albright drafted 2 documents. The first was a formal notice of lease termination for Innovate Solutions, LLC, citing extensive building-wide redevelopment and seismic retrofitting language that was both legally sound and utterly non-negotiable. The second was a cease and desist letter, addressed personally to Mark, demanding he halt all forms of contact and harassment toward me, and outlining the severe legal penalties for non-compliance. They were dispatched by a professional courier. 2 silent, paper-thin torpedoes aimed at the heart of Mark's carefully constructed world. The first torpedo struck at 2:15 p.m. Mark was in his glass-walled office at the Phoenix Lofts, likely projecting an image of success to his handful of employees. When the courier arrived, he would have opened the heavy, cream-colored envelope with casual indifference, assuming it was a routine notice from the property management. I can picture his face as he read the words. 30 days. Vacate the premises. I can imagine the blood draining from his face, the confident posture slumping as the floor fell out from under him. The letter informed him that all inquiries were to be directed to Albright and Associates, a firm whose name he would know and fear. He would have scrambled, his mind racing. He would have called the property management company, his voice smooth and demanding at first, then fraying with panic as a polite, implacable secretary informed him that the decision was final and out of their hands. The walls of his glass office, designed to signify transparency and success, were now the walls of a trap. The second torpedo struck at 4:30 p.m., delivered to their apartment. By then, Mark was already home. Jess arrived from work to find him pacing the living room like a caged animal, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled. The sleek, modern apartment felt charged with his frantic energy. "Where have you been?" he snapped the moment she walked in the door. "I've been calling you for 2 hours. My phone was on silent." "I was in a meeting," she said, her voice quiet. She noticed a half-empty glass of whiskey on the chrome coffee table, a rare sight. "Mark, what's wrong?" "What's wrong?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "My company is being kicked out of its office. That's what's wrong. We have 30 days to find a new space and move. It's impossible. It'll kill us." He ran a hand through his hair, his movements jerky. "This is your mother. It has to be. Did you know she was planning this?" Jess stood frozen in the doorway, her work tote sliding from her shoulder. In her bag was a worn photo album she had retrieved from the storage unit that morning. She had spent her lunch break looking at pictures of a life she barely recognized as her own. "No," she said, her voice a whisper. "Of course not." "Well, it gets better," he said, snatching the second envelope from the table and thrusting it at her. "Read this. A cease and desist. We're being accused of harassment. She has a lawyer. A damn good one." Jess's hands trembled as she read the letter. The cold, formal language outlined their actions in brutal clarity: unwarranted pressure, threats regarding legal competence, causing severe emotional distress. It was all true. Seeing their behavior described in the detached, unforgiving language of the law made it impossible to ignore. "This is your fault," Mark seethed, turning on her. "You've been acting weird all week. You should have been managing her, keeping her on our side. Instead, you let her do this." Something inside Jess, a part of her that had been dormant for years, finally broke. The fear, the guilt, the shame, it all coalesced into a strange, unfamiliar strength. "My fault," she said, her voice low and shaking. "You stood in my mother's living room and threatened to have her declared insane. And that is somehow my fault." Mark looked genuinely stunned by her defiance. "I was trying to secure our future, a future you seem perfectly happy to enjoy as long as you don't have to get your hands dirty." "Our future," she cried, the words tearing out of her. "Our future is built on a mountain of debt you lied to me about. It's built on you pressuring me into co-signing loans for your failed projects. It's built on you trying to steal a house from my grieving mother." The dam had burst. Years of swallowed words, of suppressed instincts, of placating his fragile ego, all came pouring out. "I am tired of it, Mark," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "I am tired of your schemes. And I am tired of being your accomplice." He stared at her, his anger momentarily replaced by disbelief. In his mind, this wasn't how the script was supposed to go. He was the hero, the provider. She was the supportive wife. He took a step toward her, his expression softening into the familiar, manipulative mask of concern. "Jess, babe, you're stressed. I get it. This is a setback. But we can fix it. We just need to get your mother to see reason." "Stop it," she screamed, taking a step back. "Just stop talking." And then, in a raw, desperate cry that seemed to hold all the pain of the last few years, she blurted it out. "I'm pregnant, Mark." The words hung in the air, electric and fragile. The argument, the finances, the letters, it all fell away. There was only this new, terrifying, miraculous fact. Mark froze. He looked at her, his eyes wide. Jess watched him, her breath held, a tiny, desperate hope flickering within her. Maybe this would change him. Maybe a child. She saw the flicker of calculation in his eyes before the expression on his face even changed. She saw the gears turning behind the shock. He wasn't thinking about a nursery, or a college fund, or the color of the baby's eyes. He was recalibrating. He was assessing how to use this new piece of information. A slow, cold smile spread across his lips. "Pregnant," he said softly, the word tasting like strategy. "Well, that changes everything, doesn't it?" He took a step toward her, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "A grandchild, Jess. It's the perfect leverage. There is no way your mother can say no to her own grandchild." And just like that, the flicker of hope died, leaving a cold, hard certainty in its place. Jess stared at the man she had married, the father of her unborn child, and for the first time, she saw him with perfect, horrifying clarity. He wasn't a flawed man trying to build a future. He was a black hole, and he would consume everything she loved to feed his own emptiness. The lie she had been living was over. The morning after the fight, The apartment was unnervingly quiet. Mark had left early, slamming the door behind him, muttering something about a critical investor breakfast. Jess knew it was a lie. There were no more investors. She stood in the sterile, gray living room, and the horrifying clarity of the previous night had not faded with the dawn. If anything, it had sharpened into a single, pointed resolve. She moved with a strange, detached calm, like a stranger in her own home. She packed a single suitcase, her movements efficient and deliberate. She took her clothes, her personal documents, and the box of old photographs. She left behind the expensive jewelry Mark had bought her, the designer clothes, the entire life that felt like a costume she had been wearing for years. On the cold glass of her nightstand, she placed her engagement ring and wedding band. The diamonds, meant to symbolize an unbreakable bond, looked like tiny, cold chips of ice. She didn't feel sadness, only a profound, hollow relief, like a patient who has finally had a poisoned limb amputated. An hour later, she pulled her car into the gravel driveway of her mother's house. The front door opened before she even reached the porch. Eleanor stood there, her face etched with a love and concern so pure it made Jess's throat ache. She didn't ask questions. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just opened her arms. Jess stepped into the embrace, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. And for the first time in years, she felt the simple, profound safety of being home. "I called a lawyer." Jess whispered against her mother's sweater, the words muffled. "Our lawyer, Ms. Albright." "Good," Eleanor said, her hand stroking Jess's hair. "That's very good." Inside, sitting at the familiar kitchen table with a mug of her mother's tea, warming her hands, Jess made another call. This one was to the bank, to the private client advisor for a joint investment account. The account held the inheritance her grandmother had left her, not a fortune, but a respectable sum she had earmarked for a future she now realized would never exist with Mark. With a clear, steady voice, she requested a temporary freeze, citing a marital dispute. The advisor, professional and discreet, assured her it would be done immediately. She was just in time. Meanwhile, Mark was sitting in a soulless coffee shop downtown, his laptop open, his third espresso growing cold. This was his new office. His phone was a continuous scroll of rejections. The new lease he'd been hoping for was denied due to a bad credit report. A line of credit he was counting on had been suddenly rescinded. He was hemorrhaging money he didn't have. The walls were closing in, and the panic was a physical thing, a tightening in his chest that made it hard to breathe. Then he remembered it, Jess's inheritance, the joint investment account. In his mind, it wasn't her money, it was their money, an emergency fund. And this, he reasoned, was the ultimate emergency. He saw it as his only way out, a quick liquidation to solve his immediate problems and buy him time to formulate a new plan, a new angle to work on Eleanor. He navigated to the bank's online portal, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He found the account, the balance, a number that made him sigh with relief. He initiated the transfer, a full liquidation to be moved into his personal checking account. The screen refreshed, displaying a final confirmation page. Dual authorization required for transactions over $10. 000. Please upload a signed authorization form. He didn't hesitate. From his briefcase, he pulled a birthday card Jess had given him last year. He studied her looping, elegant signature. "Love always, Jess." He took a pen and a napkin and began to practice. His first few attempts clumsy and angular. After a few tries, he produced a forgery that was close enough. His hand was shaking, but he scanned the signed napkin with his phone and uploaded the image. He clicked submit. A small green checkmark appeared. Transaction submitted. Processing may take up to 24 hours. A wave of triumphant relief washed over him. He had done it. He was back in control. in the sun-drenched kitchen in Maple Creek. Jess's phone rang. It was a number from the bank she didn't recognize. She put it on speakerphone. "This is Jessica Vance," she answered, using her maiden name for the first time in years. "Good morning, Ms. Vance." A calm, professional voice replied. "My name is David Henderson, from the Fraud Prevention Department at Northwood Trust. I'm calling to verify a transaction requested on your joint investment account moments ago. Can you confirm you authorized a full liquidation and transfer of the account's assets?" Eleanor and Jess exchanged a look of cold, grim understanding. "No," Jess said, her voice perfectly even. "I absolutely did not authorize that transaction." There was a pause, followed by the soft clicking of a keyboard. "Thank you for confirming, Ms. Vance." "Mr. Henderson said, his tone still perfectly placid. "The transaction has been canceled and flagged as potentially fraudulent. For your protection, we have placed a permanent freeze on the account and are launching a formal investigation into the matter." He paused again. "Ms. Perfect of you, Vance, I am obligated to inform you that the submission of a forged signature to initiate a financial transfer is a federal offense. We will be compiling all relevant data, including the IP address of the originating computer and the uploaded documentation, to submit to the authorities." Ms. Albright, who had joined them via conference call, spoke up. "Mr. Henderson, this is Caroline Albright, Ms. Vance's legal counsel. My client is prepared to cooperate fully with your investigation and press charges to the fullest extent of the law." Back at the coffee shop, Mark was impatiently refreshing his email, waiting for the transfer confirmation. An email from Northwood Trust finally appeared, but the subject line made his blood run cold. Subject: urgent. Account frozen pending fraud investigation. He clicked it open, his heart pounding against his ribs. The email was a sterile, terrifying summary of his new reality. His access to the online portal was revoked. A formal investigation was underway. He would be contacted by their corporate security division. He tried to log in, but a red banner barred his way. "Access denied." His phone rang. It was a blocked number. He answered, a sense of doom settling over him. Mr. Mark Peterson." A cold, official voice asked. "This is John Riley from Corporate Security at Northwood Trust. I'm calling to inform you that a criminal complaint regarding wire fraud and forgery is being filed against you with the U.S. Attorney's Office." Mark dropped the phone. It clattered onto the table, the voice still speaking from the tiny speaker. The ambient noise of the coffee shop, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversations, the soft indie rock playing overhead, all faded into a dull roar in his ears. He looked around at the people typing on their laptops, sipping their lattes, living their normal lives. He was no longer one of them. He was trapped, not by his mother-in-law's cunning, but by the stark, inescapable consequences of his own desperate, criminal act. The checkmate was not delivered by a queen, but by a pawn he had fatally underestimated. 3 months later, I found myself in a place I never imagined I would be, a civil courtroom. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and floor polish, and the heavy, dark wood of the benches and the judge's dais seemed to absorb all the sound in the room. This was Mark's last, desperate gambit, before the full weight of the federal fraud investigation had crashed down on him. He had filed a frivolous, vindictive lawsuit against me for wrongful lease termination and business interference. It was a final attempt to paint himself as the victim. He sat across the room at the plaintiff's table, a ghost of the confident man who had invaded my home. He was thinner. His expensive suit hung on him loosely, and his eyes, when they briefly met mine, were dull with a mixture of hatred and defeat. His new lawyer, a young, hungry-looking man, shuffled papers with a nervous energy. I sat with Ms. Albright, my hands resting calmly in my lap. I was not afraid. The fear had been burned out of me weeks ago. leaving only a quiet, solid resolve. Jess was not with me. We had decided she would stay home, away from this final, ugly chapter. She needed to protect her peace and the new life she was carrying. The bailiff called for us to rise. The judge, Samuel Roberts, entered. He was a man in his late 60s with a kind, weary face and an air of unimpeachable authority. He settled into his high-backed chair and began to review the case file, his eyes scanning the documents before him. I saw him pause for a moment when he read my name, a flicker of recognition in his expression. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over Mark, then me. "Before we begin," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that filled the courtroom, "I feel it is my duty to note for the record that I was acquainted with the defendant's late husband, Mr. Arthur Vance, through our mutual work on the board of the university's scholarship fund." He looked directly at Mark's lawyer. I knew him to be a man of unimpeachable integrity and meticulous character. "Please proceed, counselor." It was not an accusation, but it was a clear message. The ground upon which Mark was standing had just become profoundly unstable. His lawyer seemed to shrink a little in his suit. He stood and began his opening statement, a blustering, theatrical performance about a well-meaning son-in-law whose only concern was the well-being of his isolated, confused mother-in-law. He painted a picture of a woman who had been manipulated by a predatory financial advisor, a woman whose sudden, erratic business decisions had destroyed a promising company. I listened to the fiction he spun, and I felt nothing but a distant pity. He was telling a story about a woman who no longer existed. When he finished, Ms. Albright rose. She didn't walk or pace. She simply stood, a picture of calm confidence. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and devoid of drama. "We could spend the day debating Mr. Peterson's version of events. Or we could simply look at the facts." She approached the bench and laid a single, slim file before the judge. "The plaintiff claims his business was wrongfully harmed by my client. The fact is, Mr. Peterson's business was a house of cards, financed by a string of defaulted loans. He claims my client is mentally incompetent. The fact is, my client has managed her late husband's considerable estate with remarkable acumen." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air before delivering the final, decisive blow. "And finally, he claims this lawsuit is about seeking justice. The fact, Your Honor, is that this is the active case file from the U.S. Attorney's Office, Mr. Anishil Testerian. Peterson is currently out on bail, facing federal charges for attempting to defraud my client via wire fraud and forgery." She placed a second, thicker file next to the first. "This is not a business dispute. It is a documented pattern of predatory harassment, culminating in a federal crime. This lawsuit is nothing more than a continuation of that harassment. We ask for immediate dismissal with prejudice." Judge Roberts stared at the federal case file, his expression grim. He read the summary page, his lips a thin, hard line. He didn't look at Mark. He didn't need to. The truth was there, in black and white. He took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This is not a hearing. It is an abuse of the court's time," he said, his quiet voice carrying the weight of final judgment. "Mr. Safe Peterson, your case is dismissed, with prejudice. Furthermore, I agree with Mrs. Albright. This filing appears to be malicious and retaliatory. I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office to be considered as evidence in their ongoing criminal case against you." He struck his gavel once. The sound was a sharp, clean crack, like a branch breaking in a silent forest. It was over. 1 year later, the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming roses filled the air. In the backyard of my home, under the shade of the old oak tree, a new sound had joined the rhythm of my life. Gurgling laugh of a baby. My granddaughter, Grace, sat in a small wooden swing, her tiny hands reaching for the sunbeams filtering through the leaves. Jess, her face relaxed and happy, gave the swing a gentle push. She had found herself again, and in motherhood, she had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. I watched them from the window of Arthur's study. His room was no longer just a sanctuary of memory, it had become a headquarters of purpose. Spread across his old desk were not financial statements, but architectural plans. After the court case, Mark had pleaded guilty and was now serving a sentence in a low-security federal prison. The details of my own story, however, refused to leave me. I thought of all the other women like me, isolated and underestimated, whose quiet lives were being dismantled by greed and neglect. Arthur had given me a fortress to protect myself. I decided to use his gift to build sanctuaries for others. The plans on my desk were for the first Hearthstone Foundation residence, a beautiful old house we were renovating on the other side of town. It would be a place where women facing elder abuse or financial exploitation could find legal aid, emotional support, and a safe harbor to reclaim their lives. It was not a charity of pity, but a foundation of strength. Grace let out a squeal of delight, and I smiled. My husband had built an empire to protect his family. Now, we would use that empire to redefine the very meaning of the word. Looking back, I understand that true victory wasn't the rap of a judge's gavel or the defeat of a man like Mark. It was the quiet moment of choice, the decision to stand up and refuse to be erased. It was in reclaiming my daughter, and in welcoming my granddaughter into a world that we had made safe for her. Arthur had armed me for a battle, and in winning it, I had found my true calling. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I have learned that the most powerful legacies are not built with money, but with purpose. The most profound strength is found not in fighting back, but in building something better in its place. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please share it. There are so many who need to hear that it is never too late to reclaim your voice, your dignity, and your life. What would you have done in my place? I would truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.